Hi friends, welcome to Beautifully Bookish Bethany, and happy Pride Month. It is June, it's Pride Month. About a month ago, I did a recommendation video that I can link up above where I was recommending sapphic romances. This is an umbrella term for romance between bisexual or lesbian or pansexual women or femme people. And in the comments of that video, some of y'all said that you would love to see me do this for science fiction and fantasy. So I have two videos coming to you this month. In today's video, I'm going to be recommending to you 10 sapphic science fiction books, and then in the next video I'll be recommending 10 sapphic fantasy books. So for those of you who are science fiction and fantasy lovers, I've got lots of recommendations for you, and honestly this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is the things that I quickly gathered up from my bookshelves, books that I love, but there is much more if you're looking for it. With that said, let's go ahead and dive into my 10 recommendations if you are looking for a science fiction book with main sapphic characters. Note that these are not necessarily all romances. They may just be books where the main character is a lesbian or bisexual woman. It varies. I will let you know as we go. We're gonna start off easy with a novella that is a science fiction mystery blend. That is The Mimicking of Known Successes by Malka. This is a futuristic science fiction novel that is also a murder mystery that's very Holmesian. It's set at a colony on Jupiter, and there's a woman investigating a possible murder. She is kind of like a Sherlock Holmes type, and her love interest is kind of like a Watson type. This is also supposed to be the start of a series of mysteries, which I am very excited about. So if you're looking for something to kind of ease you into science fiction that has some decent sci-fi elements to it, but also has a mystery element to it and a slow burn, chill sapphic romance, I would recommend this. It was great. Of course, I can't make this video without talking about the Locked Tomb series. I feel like this has become iconic for sapphic science fiction, and I would say sci-fi horror blend. Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir is the first of 3 books out so far. One thing I will say about this writing is it's very voicey and it is very experimental. It's a very strong flavor of writing, and so I feel like the people who love it really love it and the people who don't really don't. I am a big fan of the series. I love Tamsin Muir's writing. I think it's brilliant. And I really love Gideon as a character. This first book is a sci-fantasy horror locked room murder mystery mashup. There's a lot going on here, but I was such a fan. It's got lesbians and lesbian necromancers. It's not a romance. I think when they first pitched it as lesbian necromancers in space, people assumed it was a romance. It is not a romance, but there are lesbians and some of them are necromancers, and they do spend some time in space, although there's a lot more in space in the second book in the series. But if you haven't tried it yet, it's worth at least a try because I'm such a fan. Going a little more hardcore with the science fiction, I absolutely adore the Texkalon Empire duology. It begins with A Memory Called Empire by Arkady Martine. I love this so much. The world building is really interesting and different. The themes are really rich. And one of our main characters across both books is a sapphic. And in the second book in the duology, we actually get a sapphic romance as one of the perspectives. This delivered in the second book more of a romance than I think I was even expecting. But this duology, it's so good. I will say it's a little bit dense and you might need to really take your time to understand what she's doing. This first book in particular is doing so many interesting things with linguistics and diplomacy and ideas of empire. I love this duology so much. If you haven't tried it yet, go do it. Also, the second book is so fascinating because it's partly a first contact story, and it's asking questions about how we make decisions in terms of whether to be at war with the species or not, how we communicate with each other. It's real good. Another novella that I really enjoyed was Hard Reboot by Django Wexler. This does have giant mecha fighting robots in it, but it's a surprisingly sweet sapphic romance as well, which I don't think you would necessarily get from the cover. It's set in a dystopian future where wealthy people have left the planet Earth to its own devices because of climate change and pollution. It's a disaster and the poor people are left behind. In the novella, we have a junior academic going on a research trip to Earth. And while there, she ends up getting caught up in the seedy underbelly of underground illegal betting and robot fighting, and also finding a robot engineer that she strikes up a relationship with. I really liked this a lot, and Django Wexler is one of the few male authors who I think writes really good sapphic romances that don't feel like they're fetishizing and they feel like actual people. So if you're looking for a fun little novella, I would suggest this. My next suggestion is the first in a space opera trilogy. This is Unconquerable Sun by Kate Elliott. I love this series so far. At the time of filming, the first 2 books have been released. The 3rd book is set to come out in the next year or 2. This is a gender-flipped Alexander the Great in space, and it's so fascinating. Our main character is a young woman named Sun who is trying to fill the shoes of her mother, who created this giant empire. Sun is Sapphic. There are other Sapphic relationships within her inner court and circle as well. This is a book that is packed chock full of world building, plot, action, relationships. There's court politics, there are battle scenes, there's twists and turns, and it's reflecting this real life history in really interesting ways. So if you haven't tried this series yet, you really should give it a try. It is so underhyped. The next book is very polarizing. It's not going to beat everyone's taste, but if you are a queer sci-fi lover with religious trauma, might I suggest A Genesis of Misery by Neon Yang? Listen, this is kind of a retelling of the Joan of Arc story, but set in space, and it is very much about religion as it impacts individual lives, but also religion as it interfaces with politics and larger world concerns and war and stuff like that. So it's following our main character, who is sort of a Joan of Arc figure. Set in the future, there's kind of an AI element to it, and I don't want to spoil anything, but I freaking loved this. I thought it was brilliant. It was nuanced. There are lots and lots of religious references that I feel like people who were deep into either Catholicism or evangelical Christianity might pick up on. Again, kind of a niche story, but I do think there's an audience out there for it, and maybe that's you. So if that sounds up your alley, I would suggest it. And our sort of Joan of Arc character is Sapphic and gender fluid. Then for one that might already be on your radar because it's a big award winner and a little bit more of a literary take on science fiction, but it does have a really lovely Sapphic romance in it, that is The Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. This novel is really beautifully written, and I don't want to say too much about it, but it is one of the few cases of a book that deals with time travel that works for me, because it's really not about the mechanics of the time travel and trying to make that make sense. It's more about time travel as a metaphor and as a mechanism for talking about memory and hope and regret and humanity. I think this book is beautiful. I loved it, and it does have a Sapphic romance in it that's very good. If you want sci-fi that is weird and blended with horror, you really should try Escaping Exodus by Nikki Drayton. This is the most bizarre and unique thing that I've read, but it's so compelling. It does have horror elements to it, so heads up about that, but it's also got lots of queer characters, and it's asking a lot of interesting questions about patriarchy and gender and power, because it's set in a matriarchal culture where these people have sort of a symbiotic relationship with this giant creature that flies in space, and they live inside of it. It's very weird and very interesting, but it does have Sapphic elements to it, but it's doing a lot of really fascinating things with gender and sexuality and patriarchy and power and what all of those things mean. Really, really brilliant. Highly recommend. Next is another more polarizing book that I am going to suggest, but with caveats. This is not everybody's cup of tea, but it was very much mine, and I would love to see this get into the hands of more people who might love it for what it is. This is A Half-Built Garden by Ruthanna Emrys. It's a slow, quiet, thoughtful science fiction novel that is part climate fiction, part first contact story, and one of the big themes of this book is motherhood and what motherhood means for humans, but also what it might mean for other species, which as a parent myself, I really loved that. I thought it was fascinating, and the way that she explores the alien species and culture in this is reminiscent to me of Ursula K. Le Guin, who again has this kind of academic, slow, thoughtful prose, and this felt very similar to me. Our main character is a queer Jewish woman who is a scientist in a polyamorous family unit who has an infant. It's set in a kind of climate apocalyptic but more hopeful sort of future Earth, and she is the first person to make contact with a new alien species and plays a diplomatic role with it. And what's interesting is that these aliens are very concerned about their children, and for them you show trust and respect by having your infants with you when you're communicating for like political things. It's great. I love it. I think it's so smart and so fascinating, but there are people who didn't like it, who are like, this is a lot of motherhood, this is a lot of like slow, weird things. But if you love Ursula K. Le Guin and those themes and that concept appeals to you, I would suggest it. She is in a Sapphic relationship, and I think it's really great. My final suggestion is a little bit of an older title, and I think this is a good reminder that there have always been queer people here, and there have been queer women writing science fiction for a long time. I'm sure there are other examples beyond just this, but this was one that was on my bookshelves. From 1992, this is Dream Ships by Melissa Scott. Once it gets going, it turns into kind of a sci-fi thriller that's really interesting and engaging. It follows a bisexual young woman who's sort of a space pilot, and she and her team, her crew, get hired to fly this experimental spacecraft, but things end up going really wrong. So I won't spoil what happens, but I think it's really fascinating. It's this kind of futuristic sci-fi novel with a bit of a thriller mystery plot to it and a bisexual main character. Again, it came out in 1992. So there are older things than this in science fiction that have queer characters, but I think this is a good one to include. So there are 10 Sapphic science fiction recommendations for you. Hopefully there was something in here that caught your interest that maybe you didn't know about before that you could pick up. Happy Pride, and I wish you a wonderful time reading great queer books. There's much more than this, but these are the ones we're talking about today. Talk to me in the comments down below. Let me know any of your thoughts or feelings on anything I talked about in this video. And for question of the day, I would love to hear recommendations from you. Do you have any Sapphic or just generally queer science fiction books that you are a big fan of that you would suggest to other people? Leave them in the comments down below. If you like this video, it always helps if you give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you want to see more. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.